Hello, my name is Evan Willhite, and I'm a senior front-end engineer at Four Kitchens. This is the fourth video in the series Component-Based Theming in Drupal, and I realized in going through the other videos and editing them that there were just some gaps that it might be helpful to fill in terms of especially the assets, the CSS and JavaScript. And then I'd also like to go through, as we talk about JavaScript especially, just another component in the system that's nested similar to the card component we went through. So maybe that'll help paint a better picture of how to build a component. So let's get started. So in terms of the CSS on the site, we are using Sass, specifically SCSS syntax. You may have heard me mention that files in here are dispersed according to their component. So you have a CSS file in all of these areas where you have defined CSS for that specific component. And again, I'm using BIM syntax, block element modifier syntax. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to build a system that's not only less fragile by nature because it's not using that inheritance chain that causes so many problems in CSS anyways, but it also allows you to grow that system and actually remove pieces over time. The ideal situation when it comes to CSS is that you can grow it and add to it over time, but that you can also remove things. And this is something that CSS has never been very good about, and that's why things like BIM came into popularity. And so the idea is that as this application continues to grow, maybe the card grid organism stops being used. And so when you go to edit that in the system and you want to remove it, you can remove that card grid system and know that you have not impacted anything else in terms of the styles of the rest of the website or the markup. That isolation is key. But to get back to the CSS side of things, to be able to do that, we are using SCSS, like I mentioned, and we're storing those in these separate component folders. And what we're doing is we're importing those all into a single style sheet. So what we want at the end of the day is we want the application to load all of these styles just in a single style sheet. So you'll see in that patterns directory, the only top level item that's a file is this style.scss file that actually imports from these other directories. And we are using gulp as our task runner. And I'm not going to get into that side of things. That's kind of a whole video series unto itself, and there are better people for that. But we just know that we are using gulp. We're using a task runner to compile this Sass down into a CSS file. And one of the things that we've included is a globbing mechanism that allows you to glob all files within directories. And so that's what that's doing there. And what it's doing at the end of the day is it's putting a style.css file into a dist directory here in the theme. And these are the files that we want to serve up in the actual application itself. So again, allows for all of these components to be broken out, allows for the styles to be isolated into single files. This makes for easier editing. It makes easier to hand off a project to another developer or to a client in terms of troubleshooting. But then also at the end of the day, we're actually compiling all of those styles into a single style sheet using gulp. In terms of the Drupal side of things, how we're loading that is probably pretty obvious. This is a global style sheet. So just in the info file, the Drupal 8 way of defining a library, or one of the ways, is to use this syntax in the info file where you actually are loading a global library. So here that's in the info file, and then in our libraries file is where we've actually defined this library, this global library. And so you can see that we've put in a theme level CSS reference here, so dist style.css. And there's also a global JavaScript file where we may put things like loading typekit on every page or something like that. Global JavaScript that you know needs to be loaded on every page. So that is in there as well, and that's also being compiled in that dist directory up here. So hopefully that helps clarify the CSS side of things a little bit. Let's jump into the JavaScript side. We want to be more careful with JavaScript. It's not necessarily that JavaScript takes longer to load unless you're just writing enormous amounts of it. but it's the execution time of JavaScript that you don't want to impact page performance. So a lot of times you want to separate JavaScript out and not load it on every page. So you already saw that there's a global JavaScript file where you can stick things that are truly global that need to be loaded on every page. But I want to walk through how to create a component and include JavaScript specific to that component. So I'm going to go over here to our Pattern Lab instance, and I'm going to show an Accordion item. So this is an Accordion item in our system. It's open by default. Actually, the first item in every accordion is open, and you'll see that here in a second. But it just has this very simple close and open click interaction there. And actually, let's go over to an accordion organism with multiples. So you'll see the top one by default is open. You can open and close them at will. So we have defined that component. And here is the accordion item itself under molecules, and then under organisms, the accordion, which is just the sort of wrapper for it. So let's take a look at this item, and let's talk about how to load JavaScript for this. So just like in the previous videos, we have the twig file that defines our HTML for the accordion item. So you can see that's very simple, just using definition list for the accordion item itself. So we have the term, which is what you see over here in bold, and then we have the definition, and that is what you see in terms of when you click on it. And then we have our CSS that defines just sort of the simple base level CSS that we have here. And then we have our JavaScript for the accordion. So we have all of the things that we need to make this component, right? We have them all, they're all separated nicely. We have the accordion item component, we have the accordion wrapper up here, which the wrapper for that, it should look very similar to the card one that we did earlier. It just wraps it in a definition list. And then for Drupal, it's looking for rows because we're going to be showing these in a view, which I'll get to in a minute. And then for Pattern Lab, it's just looping through and creating 4 of those, which is what you saw over here. So we have this ideal sort of situation. We have a component built or a couple of components that are built, and we want to include those in the Drupal system. And so let's go down here, and I have actually already created, I've created an FAQ content type on the website. So this is a new content type, and it has 2 fields. It has title and body. And I've also created a simple view just showing teasers, the teaser view mode of that content type. So here I am on the FAQ page. This is my view page, and here it is listing the default teasers for this display. So let's go in and let's create our node template for FAQs. So since we don't want these to click through, there's not going to be actually a drill down for these. I'm not going to worry with making this the teaser display. I'm just going to override all of the FAQ content type templates, and I'm going to rename this real quick. So our change will show up. And then you can see in here, mostly very similar to what we've done before. We're including the molecule for that twig file. Our 2, let me open this up real quick. Our 2, the accordion item, the item itself and the accordion definition are variables. So we're passing from this node template simply the label, which is the title, and then the body field into those 2 things. So what's new here is this attach library syntax. So very smartly in Drupal 8, they allow you to attach a library in a twig template. So basically this is saying, whenever you're using this node template, we also need to load this library. And the way that you create a new library is to go down into that same libraries file we looked at earlier, where we had our global library, and you create your library namespace, and then you tell it using the exact same syntax as above what files you want to be a part of that library. And you can see here that I've just pointed to that accordion item JavaScript file that's in our component up here. So basically I'm saying every time this is loaded, I want you to load that JavaScript file on the page. So I've gone over here and I've cleared my cache. Let me reload the page here. So not only do we have our component styling, but we are also loading that Accordion JS JavaScript file that you can see in the page right here. and that's just using that attach library function. So we've built in the system, we've used the syntax that the system expects. All of our markup, all of our JavaScript, and all of our CSS can be housed together in a very clean way. And then we're pulling it into the system using ways that Drupal would expect. So in this case, like using attached library, we still get to take advantage of the Drupal aggregation system for JavaScript. So yeah, I encourage you to respond in the comments. Always looking for feedback and even changes and better ways of handling these things. So I thank you for your time, and yeah, let's continue to do component-based building.